Set 16 is live and TFT flow has been updated. I've been waiting for this set for a while. If you've been paying attention to the YouTube channel, you'll notice that I haven't uploaded in a couple of months, and that's because set 15 was a little bit rough. So very grateful that set 16 is here. A quick overview of the mechanic. So by default, there are 60 champions that you can see every single game, and then there are 40 champions that you cannot see in your shops until you unlock them. For example, in order to see Graves in your shop, you have to field a Twisted Fate with 2 items equipped, and then he'll be unlocked in the following round. This is very important for the Bilgewater opener, for example. And this page on TFT Flow will show you every single unlock. You can sort it by cost. For example, you can see how to unlock the 7 cost champions, which are very similar to 5 cost champions, but usually require a more difficult unlock condition and are quite powerful ways to capstone your board. Then there are also level requirements that you can see. So for example, Baron Nashor requires level 10. So you're not going to be seeing a whole lot of that. And yeah, generally speaking, understanding these unlock conditions is an important part of set 16. If you look at any of the comp guides, you'll find this little unlock icon next to any champion that needs to be unlocked. So for example here, Tom Kench must be unlocked. If you just hover over the unlock icon, it will tell you how to unlock him. In this case, you have to spend 500 Bilgewater Silver Serpents, which is a currency you get from the trade. You can also click over here and see how to unlock him. You could look at the tooltip. So there are a lot of ways on the website to see how to unlock champions. Now, when it comes to the meta, they released a patch on Monday night. It is currently Wednesday afternoon, day 1 of the set release. So there has not been a lot of time for the meta to form. I'm sure things are going to get updated a lot from the time of this video, even like 48 hours later. So if you want the most recent meta read, come over to the website. But I do think there are some important takeaways that we can look at here. So first of all, Bilgewater. There are 5 different ways to play this opener. It's pretty insane. So you can play it into your typical fast 8 spot and then eventually drop down to 3 Bilgewater, play a bunch of high quality units. You can play it into this like Draven Nautilus Gangplank reroll. You can play it into this crazy most difficult comp of all time, actually the most difficult comp of all time, where you try to unlock the T-Hex, which is back from set 9. This requires you to get a bunch of upgraded Piltover units, but you'll notice that there is only 1 Piltover unit on your final board that isn't the T-Hex. So yeah, very difficult to unlock this unit, but very cool if you're able to. And then you have Graves reroll, pretty straightforward, 2 cost reroll, and the Bilgewater shops help you unlock or get the 3 stars that you need. And then the final way that you can play around it is you can play towards Slayers. You can 3-star this Gangplank and itemize him in this line. So lots of different ways to play that Bilgewater opener. One thing to note about the current meta is that Fast 9 is performing quite well. That's because the 5 cost in set 16 are very powerful and very flexible. They can fit into almost any board. They provide utility, almost every single one of them. And none of them really provide origins. I think all of the default 5 cost only provide class traits. So for example, Vanquisher instead of Noxus. And that goes a really long way towards being able to splash them anywhere. And you can even play them without their traits because of the utility that they provide. So for example, if we look at Lucian Senna here, if we look at Soulbound, you can see that while Senna is out, all allies gain 7% damage reduction. And while Lucian is out, all allies gain 7% damage amp. And it switches back and forth as Senna Lucian cast. So these 5 costs are really powerful, and you're going to find that at least for the first couple of days where the PvE players are kind of bullying some of the lower elo players, or maybe people who haven't been able to play the game at all and aren't familiar with it yet, they're going to be abusing these 5 costs. And generally speaking, almost every single comp in the game wants the cap by playing as many 5 costs as possible, with some exceptions here. So your fast 8 boards are typically going to be relegated to lower tiers. In this case, I have Yunara up a little bit higher because she's a very easy line to play, especially if you get something like the Ionia, which gives you XP, because that will allow you to push to level 9, and that can go a long way towards being competitive in the early set. I do think that Yunara here is going to be moved down to B tier as we see these level 9 boards take over though. So the main thing to understand about the meta currently is that most of the time, you want to be aiming for these level 9 boards that have a lot of 5 cost, and that means you're going to want to tempo in the early game, you're going to want to prioritize econ augments, and hopefully be able to get to all of the different 5 costs before other people do, because they are going to be contested here. If you have to play towards a fast 8 board, if you have to play towards a reroll line because it's your best option, that's acceptable. Just understand that you're probably not going to win the game from those spots. All right, here is the tier list. It works the same as it has for the last two sets, which is this is where you can go if you want to see the most broken conditions in the meta right now. So for example, Talisman of Ascension on Sion, completely broken. If you look at this unit, it scales his max HP over the course of the game, and his ability also scales with max HP. So he usually lasts the entire fight. He is most of the time going to be able to survive until this 22 seconds has passed. And then at that point, he just basically cleans up the entire fight. This particular artifact has been like -1, -1.25 placements for the entirety of PBE and never got nerfed. So yeah, Sion Bard reroll, probably quite good if you're able to get Talisman of Ascension. Rapid Fire Cannon on Graves is quite good. The Darken Bow on Belveth is broken. It's been broken for the entirety of PBE. They did nerf this and it's still quite good. And then Jewel Lotus is just a very good augment in general in this particular set right now. So you can click this with pretty much any comp and it will raise the tier of that comp. Econ Augments also really good right now. So you'll notice that all of the Fast 9 boards are here in S+ tier. So your Lucian Kindred board, your Mel Flex board, your Arcanist board, every single one of these require a lot of gold in order to hit the final board. And so all of your Econ Augments are going to look quite good in this particular set. In fact, one thing to note here is that Econ Augments in general are really powerful, regardless of whether you're playing towards Fast 8 or Fast 9, and even reroll, to be honest with you. Econ almost never feels wrong to take at least one Econ Augment every single game. So Econ Augments are going to look quite good here. And the other thing I want to mention is too much value into this Ishtal reroll line. So in general, Bard is an interesting reroll option that usually you're going to want to play from spots where you're able to get some free rerolls before the stage 2 carousel, because that's how you're able to unlock him. And usually it's just way too expensive to spend 8 gold to unlock Bard. So if you get something like Too Much Value, this gives you free rerolls every single turn, and you could play 4 2-cost in this line. This was the most broken line during the PBE, but then they nerfed it really heavily before the set went live. I still think it's actually quite good. It might even be A tier still, and especially if you're able to get this Too Much Value Augment or Prismatic Ticket, both of these are quite good into this line. And Too Much Value in general with Bard should be a good combination for the entirety of the set. So that's another one that I wanted to mention here. All right, let's start off with the boogeyman, which is Bilgewater. The way Bilgewater works is you get offered this new currency called Silver Serpents every single round. The amount that you get offered goes up as you have more Bilgewater units on your board. You'll also get 2 Silver Serpents anytime any Bilgewater unit gets a takedown. So they just have to participate in the kill. They do not have to get the finishing blow. You can spend these Silver Serpents in a new shop. Okay, so I'm going to show you this shop real quickly from Leduc's video here. You can see right here, this is his Silver Serpents. He has 60 total right now. He's going to click on it, and this is going to open up this shop here. Now, this shop is going to offer you different things depending on what your Bilgewater breakpoint is, okay? So at 3 Bilgewater, you can only get offered a tier 1 stat buff. So that's going to look like this here. You can get offered a tier 1 unit. So that's these options here, the Nautilus and the Gangplank. And then you can also get offered something called a Bilgewater Lesser Duplicator, which can be used to dupe any 3-cost or lower Bilgewater unit. Okay, that's for 3 Bilgewater. When you move up to 5 Bilgewater, you now get offered better units. So you can see the collection of units here. You get offered possibly a tier 1 item. So that's either Captain's Brew or Lucky Doubloon. And you can also get offered tier 2 stat buffs. And then finally at 7 Bilgewater, you can get offered even better units, and you can get offered what are known as tier 2 items, which are the most powerful Bilgewater items that you can be offered. Bilgewater items can only be equipped to Bilgewater champions. Now, of note here is this item called the Lucky Doubloon. What Lucky Doubloon does is anytime the unit that's equipped with this gets a takedown, you'll get 3 additional Silver Serpents. So it's almost like adding a unit and a half worth of value to that particular unit for generating Silver Serpents. And the way that Bilgewater gets played, the 2 main options that are available is 1, you can stay on 3 Bilgewater because you'll notice that you're pretty much guaranteed to get tier 1 units in Bilgewater Lesser Duplicators more often, and you're not flooding your unit options with these like 4 costs that you can see here. So you're going to be able to hit your Nautiluses, your Gangplanks, your Graves, and your Twisted Fates far more often from this tier 1 unit slot, which means that for reroll purposes, 3 Bilgewater is quite valuable. But the other way you can play this is you can look to try to get as many items as possible. In fact, this is part of what makes Bilgewater so powerful. So you try to get this Lucky Doubloon and this Captain's Brew, and then you can go into 7 Bilgewater and get these tier 2 Bilgewater items, which are very powerful. Now, you do not need to have 7 Bilgewater on your board during player combat to actually see the tier 2 items. If we look at what Leduc is doing here, right? So this is a shop that was generated when he had 3 Bilgewater. If he were somehow able to field 7 Bilgewater at this exact moment and then bought this Gangplank here, the next slot that would refresh here would be a 7 Bilgewater slot, okay? So he's going to buy this, and you can see it moves over. He got a black market restock. He could buy this to refresh the entire shop. And if he had 7 Bilgewater right now and he clicked this, it would provide him a full 7 Bilgewater shop. And then he could use that and then he could drop down to like 5 Bilgewater or 3 Bilgewater and keep his 7 Bilgewater shop and eventually work towards the 7 Bilgewater options. So this is one of the many techs that are available with Bilgewater. It's quite unique. So this is something that will get optimized over the course of the set. This is the Fast 8 version of the composition. So the Fast 8 version of the comp is looking to use the Bilgewater shop, ideally to get to 5 Bilgewater by stage 3. You're looking to upgrade your Nautilus, you're looking to upgrade your Graves, you're looking to upgrade your Gangplank potentially, whatever your item holders are. And then you're looking to try to get this Lucky Doubloon item, farm as many Silver Serpents as possible. Also, Captain's Brew is quite good as well. So that's the other 5 Bilgewater item. And then you're going to save your Silver Serpents until you're able to field 7 Bilgewater on your board, so you can start getting powerful items like this First Mate Flintlock, so you can get the Pile of Citrus, so you can get the Bark Knuckles. Again, these are the most powerful items, and the goal is to be up around 4 items by the end of the game, and then you transition down to 5 Bilgewater, or ideally all the way down to 3 Bilgewater, which you can see here, where you can see that these powerful 5 costs like Fiddlesticks, you do not need to have Vanquisher on your board to play Fiddlesticks. It's completely fine. Then you also have Tarek, for example, which is basically a threat that provides magic resistance to your entire board. So there are a lot of flexible unit slots that you can play around. There's also this Freljord option that you can play around. You can play around Gangplank if you want to the entire game. You don't need to unlock Aatrox. Sometimes he can be difficult to unlock. Here's a Aatrox version with only 3 Bilgewater. Here's one without the Aatrox, where you play Ornn instead. So there's a lot of different options for this Bilgewater comp, but the main idea is typically going to be to play around Misfortune, get as many Bilgewater items as possible, and then drop down to 3 Bilgewater in the late game, playing as many legendaries as you can. Then we have the Bilgewater Draven reroll. This plays very differently, where our goal is not to get as many Bilgewater items as possible. Instead, most of the time, what we're actually going to be doing here is using the 3 Bilgewater shops in order to be able to try to get us to Gangplank 3 and Nautilus 3 as soon as possible by prioritizing buying those units from the Bilgewater shop. The next one we have is the Graves reroll, which is yet another reroll option, where instead of going for that Gangplank 3, you're going to be prioritizing Graves and Twisted Fate, and then you're also going to be going for Nautilus 3, and you're going to end up on a board like this. The last option is not one that you're going to see in most of your games. I have a full write-up on this on the competitive TFT subreddit, and you can see there is a lot to read about, and I even wrote more on the subreddit post. This is a very, very difficult comp to play. Do not recommend playing in most of your games. But Bilgewater Gunslingers, the key difference with this line compared to the other ones is that you are looking to unlock the T-Hex. And what's difficult about this is that in order to unlock the T-Hex, you need to field 9 unique star levels of Piltover. Now, if we look at the Piltover trait, there are only 6 options available, and one of them is the T-Hex itself. So you cannot obviously have the T-Hex to unlock the T-Hex. So you need to play all 5 of the prior Piltover units, and you need to 2-star all of them except for one of them. And the problem is none of them fit on your board except for Loris. So you end up in this weird spot where you're holding Piltover units on your bench. You also want to hold on to Bilgewater units on your bench so you can go up to 7 Bilgewater in order to get the Bilgewater items. Then you want to move back down to 3 Bilgewater. This is like I said, one of the most difficult comps in the game. Most people are not going to pilot this correctly, and I suspect that it's more likely going to be like a C or D tier comp for most people just because of how difficult it is to play. People are going to go 8th trying to play this a lot, but the very cool thing about this is if you are able to get to this final board, if you're able to get to this T-Hex and you're able to use it if you're able to use Ornn, for example, to pilot the T-Hex, because that's one of the things you can do, this will give you a hex on your board that you can use to have one unit on your board pilot the T-Hex. If you have Ornn pilot the T-Hex, he has this thing where he gets a lot of HP for any Ornn artifacts that are equipped to him. Also, items in general give him a lot of max health. So you put a 3-item Ornn, feed it to the T-Hex. The T-Hex gets 80% of the Ornn's HP. You can get close to a 10,000 HP T-Hex that is your biggest damage dealer. So this board is very exciting, but also very difficult to get to. But in general here, Bilgewater is quite powerful. Also very difficult to pilot compared to a lot of lines in the past. So this is going to be a learning curve, but I think it's actually pretty fun. All right, next up we have one of the most expensive comps in the set, which is Arcanist. The reason this comp is so expensive is you need to unlock Silas, and Silas requires you to sell a 2-star Jarvan, which is a 1 cost, a 2-star Garen, which is a 4 cost, and a 2-star Lux, which is also a 4 cost. Do not underestimate how difficult it is to sell a 2-star Jarvan if you were not playing around it in the early game, so definitely try to hold on to these Jarvans. This is a comp where you're going to want as much gold as possible, because another thing that's a little bit difficult about this line is that it really wants to be able to hit Annie, because Annie provides you 2 units, not just 1. If you read Darkchild here, you can see that when you get an Annie on your board, it will summon a Tibbers on your bench, and then you can play that Tibbers on the board. And I believe now Tibbers is a better tank than Swain. It wasn't like that on the PvE, but then they nerfed Swain and his tankiness, so now I believe Tibbers actually is the better tank between the two of them. And you can try to play for this 6 Arcanist board, but because you're selling a 2-star Lux, and because your duo backline carry ideally would be Lux, that's pretty difficult to be able to get to unless you have something like reinforcements on Lux, for example. So if you aren't able to get to this second Lux and get to this board, or even if you can, it might actually turn out that this 4 Arcanist board is better. It does not have to be Xerath in this slot here. This can be a Fiddlesticks, this can be a Tarek, this could be any generic 5 cost that is strong in this slot here. But this is another line that's available for you. 2 Piltover provides a really powerful board-wide buff, especially if you're able to get something like, I believe, Blast Shields or Continuum Cogs. Both of those are really strong 2 Piltover modules that you can get in this line. So you can either play towards 6 Arcanist or 4 Arcanist plus this Piltover package, and I'm not sure exactly which one is better. This one is starting to show up, and I think there's a good chance that this one's easier to get to anyway, since you don't have to remake Lux again. So that is worth considering as well. This is one of the highest cap comps in the game, but again, just remember you need a lot of gold. When it comes to Silas itemization, you are going to just throw any AP Bruiser items onto him. The crit-based builds are the best. And then on Annie, you want as many mana items as possible, plus ideally Void Staff to shred the entire board. And that's it. All right, next up we have Lucian Kindred, Fast 9 board. This is kind of straightforward. This is one of the cheaper Fast 9 boards because you're playing around the Freljord plus this like Piltover package. So you get to play a decent number of like lower cost units than you see from some of the other Fast 9 boards, but still relatively expensive. So you're still going to want to be taking plenty of econ augments here. And then you're looking to end on Lucian and Kindred as your 2 carries. When it comes to Lucian and Senna items, very straightforward, just looking for utility here. So Last Whisper, Red Buff, really good items here. And then any AD items are good. You can build this as a Rageblade user. You can use this as a Shojin user. It does not matter. Just throw whatever you have on them. Try to stabilize in the early game with whatever items you have, and then Lucian can kind of take the leftovers. Kindred is a little bit more item specific. With Kindred in particular, you do want that typical Rageblade Kraken build. And then the third item is quite flexible. Typically, you're going to want to ideally play this from an Ionia opener where you get Ionia of the Enlightened is the best one because this will give you XP. Otherwise, you can play this from any AD opener that you have. But the big thing to understand is that you need to be able to get to level 9 so that you can play around both Lucian and Kindred. There are worlds where you can play around like Freljord Yunara type boards until you're able to get to this Lucian Kindred board in the late game, which we will talk about Freljord Yunara in a little bit. But the big thing to understand here is that, yes, we do need to get to level 9. These units are highly contested. So generally only look to angle this if you are on a super win streak with an AD based opener or if you have an econ augment. All right, next up we have Mel Flex. This was the most popular Fast 9 board during PBE, but then they nerfed Swain, Nico, Vi, and Mel, so the board is noticeably weaker than it was before. I still think it's quite good. The big thing to understand about this is that you're typically going to be playing around Swain plus Mel, and then the third Noxus unit is almost always going to be Mbessa, because in order to unlock Mel, you need a 2-star Mbessa. The only argument for it not to be Mbessa is because Vanquisher is a completely worthless trait in this comp for the most part, because Vanquisher is entirely a selfish trait that only benefits Mbessa plus Fiddlesticks. And if you look at some of these Fast 9 boards, they're often looking to play around traits that buff the entire board. For example, Arcanists provides 18 AP to the whole team, Defender provides 12 armor and MR to the whole team, 2 Piltover provides a module that benefits the entire team. And so you might see some circumstances, especially depending on balance, where some other iterations are correct. For example, there's a Draven Kindred variation. This will get Quick Striker on your board, which gives 15% attack speed to the entire board. There's also some Zillion boards that you can play around, which gets Invoker, which makes your entire team gain 1 additional mana regen. So there are some other options that are available here for how you can play around this Mel Flex board. And I want to note this because it's important to understand that almost every single comp you're going to see is going to make use of this dropdown. Okay, not every single one, but most of them, especially the Fast 9 comps, are going to use this dropdown to show you many different variations. So if you're using TFT Flow, I highly recommend that you click on this. Not enough people do. People are starting to, because I keep writing some notes down here to say, check out the dropdown, but do check out the dropdown. It is extremely important to know that there are a lot of different ways that you can play these Fast 9 boards. And if you go watch some of the pro players, you're going to find that they're playing a lot of these different options here. Here's one option where you look to play around the Shuriman units. This board is very difficult to get to, but the main idea is that you can play around Azir, you can play around Shurima, you could play around Taric if you wanted to on this board. So there are a lot of options that are available here for how to play around Mel, but the basic concept is almost always going to be Swain, Mel, third Noxus unit, Shyvana, and then flex around there for your remaining units with your Disruptor. All right, next up we have our first Fast 8 composition, which is Slayers. The tricky part about Slayers is that you must unlock Aatrox, which requires fielding a champion with 40% or more Omnivamp. And if you look at Slayer, Force Slayer only provides 16% Omnivamp, and Bloodthirster only provides 20% Omnivamp, which means you either have to play a second Omnivamp item on a Slayer, or you have to play 6 Slayer in order to unlock Aatrox. And in order to play 6 Slayer, you would have to unlock Tryndamere, which requires putting 2 items on an Ashe, which you'd have to do during neutrals, and then you have to play 6 Slayer during a player combat, which most likely makes you weaker. So you can see it's a little tricky, because you also don't really want to slam 2 Omnivamp items, because if you look at Bel'Veth best in slot, she doesn't want any Omnivamp items at all. QSS Kraken damage is her best in slot, and then on Aatrox, you don't typically want double Omnivamp. You will play double Omnivamp on Aatrox if you have to, it's completely fine, but generally speaking, you don't want to always be building double Omnivamp items in a lot of cases, which can be kind of awkward, but you must do it if it's what it takes to unlock Aatrox. The other thing I want to note here is that there are a lot of final boards. I'm showing one of the cheaper ones. There's 2 main cheaper options that are available here. You can play for 4 Slayer, 4 Vanquisher, or you can play for this 4 Slayer, 4 Juggernaut, and 3 Vanquisher. But you're always going to eventually want to drop down to 2 Slayer if possible and play around as many 5 cost and flex units as you can. This Renekton can be a Taric, it could be a Senna Lucian instead if you wanted it to be, but the main goal here always stays the same, which is that you're going to start off with this cheaper 4 Slayer board, especially since it helps you unlock Aatrox, and then eventually you're going to transition into the higher cap board. There are worlds where you can play around Gangplank 3 if you get a good Bilgewater opener and you play around 3 Bilgewater in stage 3 and you're able to get a lot of copies from the Bilgewater shops of Gangplank, and then you're able to itemize that Gangplank. That is an option as well, but most of the time that is not going to be the case. Another thing I want to note here is that Death's Defiance is one of the stronger artifacts you can get for the line because it provides 25% Omnivamp, which means single-handedly with 4 Slayer, that is enough to unlock Aatrox. And then the Darken Bow on Bel'Veth is just completely broken. This is an auto take anytime that you get offered it. Makes the line much stronger than it otherwise would be. All right, next up, we have two different ways that you can play Yunara, Freljord Yunara and then Ionia. With Freljord, this is a perfect fit board that fits very well on level 8, and then on level 9, you are naturally playing 4 different regions for Rise. So in order to unlock Rise, you have to play 4 region traits. So that would be Freljord, Ionia, Yordle, and Targon, and those 4 will enable you to be able to unlock Rise, but you can only unlock him on level 9, so he will be your level 9 in most cases, and you can use Lysandra as your item holder to naturally transition into the Rise. This is not going to be one of the higher cap boards in the meta right now. I wouldn't be surprised if this gets moved back down to B tier, because honestly, this is a get your third and be happy about it type of comp, but one thing to note is that as the meta gets optimized more and people are playing stronger and stronger boards, this is one of the better level 8 boards you can play. So it doesn't play any of the 5 cost. That means it's not going to cap very high, but it is a very strong level 8 board that you can realistically play. And because of that, it will be pretty stable in stage 4 if you're able to hit this board. The other way that you can look to play around Yunara is you can play towards Ionia. So with Ionia here, the big thing of note is there are 5 different paths that are available for Ionia. It changes every single game. The ones that are good are the ones that give you gold and XP. So I believe that is the Path of Generosity, and I forget what the path name was for gold, but either way, or sorry, Path of Generosity for gold and then Path of Enlighten for the XP. These 2 Ionia are some of the best ones. In fact, the Enlighten one, which gives you XP, is so good that you can use that to help you Fast 9 and play into the AD Fast 9, which we talked about before. But when you play towards Ionia, you're typically going to eventually want to drop out of Ionia or out of some of the Ionian units and play higher quality 5 cost. In fact, this is a rule of thumb in general with most verticals in this set. I think the only exception to this is Yordles, where most of the time you're going to want to stay in the vertical until you have enough gold to be able to play towards some of the different 5 cost. So here's a 5 Ionia example. Here's another 5 Ionia example. Here's one where we play 3 Ionia, so we drop all the way down. But the big thing to understand here is that you play your 7 Ionia, you stabilize on that, and then eventually you're going to transition into your 5 cost. One other thing I want to note here is that on Yunara in particular, this Darken Bow item is quite good. Darken Bow in general is performing well, and then Gold Collector and Flicker Blade are also quite good on Yunara. All right, next up we have Freljord. So you know how I just mentioned that with most verticals, you want to drop out of the vertical to play higher quality units? And I thought that Yordles was the only exception. Yeah, I just realized 2 seconds later that vertical Freljord is also one of those verticals that you're probably going to want to stay in 7 Freljord. At least it was like that during the entirety of PvE. There was a board that people were playing more often, which was 5 Freljord with Invokers. Which is this board right here, where you play around the Kabuko and then you have your Zillion. But I found that if you go look at the data, it's pretty much always better to play around 7 Freljord, but I feel like this board must be better. Okay, so it's one of those weird situations because it's so efficient to play Kabuko on the board and then Anivia plus Lysandra, and then you get to play Zillion. It just makes sense. So I wouldn't be surprised if this 5 Freljord Invoker is higher cap, but definitely easier to get towards the 7 Freljord board, and it does seem to perform relatively well. I think 7 Freljord might just be a little bit overstated. I'm not totally sure about that, but it might just be a little bit overstated right now. So for now, I would definitely consider staying in 7 Freljord, but I'm not 100% sold on that. And I think if you're able to get an early Zillion, like on 4-2, for example, when you're rolling down, then definitely consider angling towards this 5 Freljord for Invokers. But this comp got super buffed with the Lysandra buff. She went from 80 mana down to 70 mana, and I think they also increased her starting mana. And I also think this Volibear unit's kind of a beast. I think he's underrated, or was underrated. Now people are starting, I think, to play him a little bit more. So I think in general, this line is quite good. The big question mark is just going to be, should you play 5 Freljord or 7 Freljord? I think you should play 7 Freljord right now, but it is something where if you look at all the other verticals, it makes sense to drop out of the vertical. So long term, I expect this to be something that changes. And again, this is another one of those comps that you're not going to win with all that often because, again, you're not playing all of the different powerful 5 cost. So you should only really expect to be able to top 4 with this line and then kind of get out of the game. It's fine. All right, next up we have Freljord Warwick. So this comp you've basically already seen before. It's the same as the Lucian Kindred comp. The only difference is 2 units, which is that instead of playing Ornn and Fiddlesticks, you're playing Warwick and Jinx, which leads to this like nearly perfect synergy comp. I think actually it is perfect synergy. It is. And this was one of like the premier Fast 8 comps during the PvE. One thing about this that would make it a little bit difficult to just switch over to the Fast 9 version of this board is the fact that Warwick wants to get itemized in this comp, and there's not really a good item holder of bruiser melee items in the other version. So that is worth noting, is that like, yes, you could technically cap this into the Lucian Kindred board, but it's usually not going to be played like that. Usually the way this line gets played is you're actually going to be playing around something like Misfortune on level 8, and then you're going to have Misfortune plus Warwick duo carry with Braum as your tank, and you're never really going to have items for Kindred until very late on into the game. So that's one complication about this line, is that it's prioritizing less on having Kindred plus Lucian and prioritizing more on having Lucian plus Warwick. And that does kind of change how the line plays a little bit, and I think it caps a little bit lower, with the caveat that you are more likely to be stable in stage 4 because you can actually hit this board in stage 4 without having to go Fast 9. So this board is not going to win most lobbies, but it is a good top 4 and get out comp. All right, next up we have Shadow Isles. So Shadow Isles is quite unique because in order to even play the composition, you need to have a 2-star Viego with 2 items equipped to unlock Yorick, because you cannot play Shadow Isles unless you have Viego plus Yorick to start off with. Now, once you have those 2 units, you'll be able to field Shadow Isles, and once you field it, anytime any champion dies, doesn't matter if it's your champion or theirs, you will gain a soul. And as you farm souls throughout the course of the game, you're going to unlock Gwen, and then you're going to unlock Callista, and then finally you will unlock Thresh as the premier 5 cost for the trait. So it's a quite unique trait. You can only play this obviously if you get an early Viego 2. Would not play this if you do not have Viego 2 by 2-1. And it is quite a strong comp. It's pretty straightforward to play. One thing that's great about it is because it's gated behind this Viego, it's pretty much uncontested as long as you're the only person that was able to get that Viego itemized, and you'll know very early on if somebody is playing towards Shadow Isles. So usually this comp gets played as Fast 8. You could theoretically play it as a reroll comp where you go for Gwen 3. This was something that was happening a lot during PvE in the early phases because Gwen was a very powerful unit. Unfortunately, 3-cost reroll is just a little bit on the underpowered side, and Callista is good enough that you should play this as a Fast 8 comp, and most of the time you're not actually going to be able to play for Gwen 3. So because you're not going to be able to play for Gwen 3 unless you get some artifact like Rapid Fire Cannon, for example, which is very good on Gwen, then most of the time you're actually not going to be itemizing Gwen all that much at all, and you're going to be putting all of your AP items on Thresh in the late game. You're going to put all of your AD items onto Callista. There are a bunch of different variations here. This is the most standard variation where you go vertical into Warden. You can see that the traits are practically perfect here, but there are some other options here. So here's an Azir option where you could play Shuriman units on your board. Here's an option where you play around Mel. There's another version where you play around Mel. So there's a lot of options that are available here for Shadow Isles, but pretty much all of them are going to evolve dropping out of that Viego. And there are, I believe, even options. I don't know if I show one here. I don't know that I do. Okay, here's one right here where you'll even drop out of Gwen to just play a super high quality board. And this is an example of what that might look like. Now, of course, you're going to want to play those Shadow Isles as many as possible up until stage 4. In stage 4, you can start considering dropping out of the Viego because all Shadow Isles really does as you go more into the trait is increase the number of souls that you're able to get. The actual combat power value is a little bit, it's really not that much. One other thing I forgot to mention here is that the abilities that all of the Shadow Isle units have will scale with the number of souls you have. So if you look at Callista, for example, the number of spears that she summons goes up as she has more souls. If you look at Gwen, the number of snips that she does goes up with the number of souls that she has. If you look at Thresh, the amount of passive damage that he does to enemies in an AoE effect goes up the more souls that he has. So souls will also scale up all of their abilities. Going further up in Shadow Isle will increase your soul acquisition rate, but eventually in the late game, you're definitely going to want to drop out of that Viego because he just doesn't really fit on the final board. Another way that you could play Shadow Isles is if you get this augment called the Ruined King, you can play for Viego 3. This is effectively a hero augment for Viego. And there are two things of note here. So first of all, he will share his passive with all of the other Shadow Isle units. So his passive is he gains a certain amount of attack speed. It scales with souls. And I believe by the end of the game, you're looking at around like 50 to 70% attack speed from what I remember. So it's a pretty significant portion of that that's getting shared, around 30%. So it's plus 20% attack speed to all the different Shadow Isle units. And then also he gets an upgraded ability where he does his ability from set 8 where he will just jump into the middle of a huge pack of enemies and deal damage to all of them. And I am pretty certain that this craftable build, Bloodthirster, Titans, and Edge of Night, is 100% best in slot craftable that you can build. Really, you want this specific build. It's very important in my opinion. Outside of that, this is played the exact same way as traditional Shadow Isles, except this time we are keeping Viego on the board the entire game. All right, next up we have Sion Bard Reroll. So this is, I believe, the very first comp that was discovered for Bard, and it's still quite good even now. It is basically Bruiser Reroll with Bard and Aphelios, pretty straightforward. The big thing of note here is that you do need to unlock Bard, which means these reroll augments are always going to be good. That's your Prismatic Ticket, your Epoch, your Trade Sector. Too much value should probably be in here as well. All of these are going to make it so that you can unlock Bard practically for free, and that goes a really long way because spending 8 gold before the stage 2 carousel is extremely expensive. The comp is not, in my opinion, that broken unless you have a really good spot for it, or if you have a reroll augment that helps, or if you have Talisman of Ascension, of course. I've mentioned this before, but Talisman of Ascension on Sion is just completely busted. He will just basically end every single fight. And then when it comes to your backline here, you're looking to put AP items onto Bard and then AD items onto Aphelios. Honestly, I'm pretty sure this is an AD comp and not an AP comp. I've seen people prioritizing Aphelios items now more than Bard. It used to be the other way around. Bard used to be the priority over Aphelios, but now that I'm seeing more Aphelios, I could argue this is more along the lines of AD, but really it just depends on what you have a spot for. It can play towards both of them, and if you do play towards Bard and you don't think you're going to be able to play towards this Aphelios, you could just play Zoe in this slot instead of Bard, which will give you Shred, which is pretty valuable. One thing to note about Aphelios is that he does Sunder, so you don't have to build Last Whisper onto this guy. And then Red Buff is obviously good, or anti-heal anywhere in the comp. Sunfire Cape obviously has always been pretty good in Bruiser compositions. Spirit of Redemption actually turns Anima Visage into a redemption like it was in the old effect. Which we know was really broken in any of the Bruiser lines, so I'm pretty sure this augment is completely broken in this. And that's mainly it when it comes to Sion Bard reroll. All right, next up we have Noxus. So we've already mentioned with verticals that it's typically correct to drop out of the vertical and play higher quality units. And we kind of showed that with Mel Flex, which is just 3 Noxus, where we play around Mel Swain and Bessa, Mel Swain Draven, Mel Swain Sion, and then pair those units with high quality 5 cost. And so that is typically going to be the correct way to look to play around Noxus. But it is easier to play the line this way. And if you're able to get an augment like Bringer of Ruin, this will buff up the summon that you get from Noxus, and he can be very powerful, and it's easier to play the line if you just stay in the Noxus units. So this is what your board would look like in that case. You could obviously also drop down the 5 Noxus. There's also a world where you don't play around this Aatrox because he's a little bit harder to unlock. You could play around Shyvana and drop out of the Briar, for example. So there are better versions of the board where you drop out of the vertical Noxus, but you can play towards that vertical Noxus board and just accept that you're playing for a top 4. And if you do have Bringer of Ruin, this is one of the better augments for ensuring that you do get a top 4 with vertical Noxus. All right, next up we have Demacia. So with Demacia here, the big thing of note is that you want to unlock Galio. And to unlock Galio, you need 12 unique star levels of Demacia. There are 7 Demacian units that you can play in total before unlocking Galio. So obviously, Galio cannot contribute to unlocking Galio. So if there's 7 in total, you need to have 6 2-stars, or you need to have 5 2-stars and 2 1-star units on your board in order to unlock the Galio, which is definitely doable if you were playing the Demacian units the entire game. Once you unlock Galio, he will contribute to your board from your bench. So he will give you 1 Demacia from your bench, and when Demacia units rally, he will get summoned to the field, which is pretty important to understand because this means that you can actually drop out of some of your Demacian units in order to play a stronger board. Now, the most natural transition for the Demacia board is to unlock Silas. We talked about Silas before, where to unlock this unit, you need to sell a Jarvan 2, you need to sell Garen 2, and you have to sell Lux 2. What's difficult about this final board here, though, is that you have to sell these 2-star units and then ideally remake Lux 2 and Garen 2. There's also an option here to play around 6 Arcanists, but you need to have 3 Demacia on your final board in order for Galio to come onto the field. So just keep that in mind. But this is definitely the best way to cap the board, is to play around Silas in some way or another. And this is just one example of how you might be able to do that. Another thing I want to mention here is reinforcement, because we've already mentioned that how you cap this comp is getting to Silas. Reinforcement guarantees one of your 2-star forecasts, which is great. So definitely something worth considering. And then, of course, like most Fast 8 comps, all of the econ augments are pretty good, especially like gold and silver econ augments are relatively good because those are traditionally have been quite good for Fast 8 comps. The last thing I want to mention here is this Dragon Guards augment. So this augment here is a prismatic that you can get on 4-2 only that will give you a Shyvana and a 2-star Jarvan. It's basically a hero augment for Jarvan, where every single time that your Shyvana cast, your Jarvan is going to jump in, kind of like set 9 Jarvan, but he does a lot of damage based on his armor and MR, and he will do like 6, 7, 8,000 damage in some fights. So worth noting here that this augment is very good. It's not guaranteed to like win you the game or anything, but if you get offered this particular augment, you should take it if you are playing around Demacia. Another thing to note here is that this augment gives you Jarvans every single turn. So go for your 3-star Jarvan, and then 3 turns afterwards, you'll get your 2-star Jarvan that you can sell for unlocking Silas later on, which I highly recommend going for if you have enough gold to be able to do so. One other thing I forgot to mention with Demacia is the Sentinels of Light augments, which will give you a Vayne 2 and a Lucian. It's a pair augment where both the Lucian and the Vayne power each other up. Typically would only play this if you're playing into Demacia with a Vayne setup, but if you are doing exactly that, this should be a decent enough augment because it gives you a Vayne 2. Should make it a lot easier to hit Vayne 3, and I think Vayne is actually a pretty decent unit right now. She's rated relatively highly for her early and mid game, but her main issue has typically been the boards that she's been played on, but Demacia got buffed before the set went live, so these Vayne-based boards might also be a good option for Demacia as well, even without this augment. All right, next up we have Rat Reroll or Yordle Reroll. There's actually 2 main ways that you can play this. One is you can play it as a reroll composition. So that would be where you're going for Tristana 3, Teemo 3, Kennen 3, Poppy 3, Rumble 3. You're just trying to 3-star all of them. And the main reason that you're able to do that is the Yordle trait guarantees that the first shop each round has a Yordle in it. And at 6 Yordle, you get 2 free rerolls every single round. And then the reason you're trying to 3-star these units is that as you star up your Yordles and get more 3-stars, they will grant more health and attack speed to your entire team. So that's the reason to play towards reroll. I would aim towards this if you have a really good reroll augment such as On a Roll or Prismatic Ticket. The other option here is you can play towards the Fast 8 variation, and this will allow you to get to 8 Yordles sooner, which means you're going to get these Yordle grab bags every single round, and this loot will help you scale up your board. And because you're getting the 2 free rerolls every round and your first shop is guaranteed to have a Yordle in it every single turn, you are still going to hit some 3-stars even with the Fast 8 version of the composition. The big thing of note here is that to unlock Vhagar, you need to have 2 Rabadon's death caps fielded on a unit. It doesn't matter what unit it is, doesn't have to be a Yordle unit, but this can be a very difficult condition to meet. So that's why if you look at the conditions here, you'll see Component Buffet, Pandora's, Continuous Conjuration, Crown's Will, Deadlier Caps, Wand Overflow. All of these are used to make it so that you can unlock your Vhagar. And of course, he doesn't unlock until level 7, so that's another reason that you would play towards this Fast 8 version, is that you can actually play around Vhagar if you have those death caps. I think this version is slightly better than the Yordle reroll version, but if you have a really good reroll augment like Prismatic Ticket, for example, then you would play towards this version. This is a top 4 and get out type of composition. Even if you're able to get to 8 Yordle early, most of the time you're just not going to be able to outscale all of those Fast 9 boards that I showed earlier in the video, but this is definitely one of the easier comps to play in the set. All right, next up we have Void, which is similar to Zaahen from set 9, which is a little bit confusing because Zaahen is in this set as well. It gives you these mutations that you can equip to Void champions. These take up the same slot as power-ups and anomalies. In other words, you can have 3 items plus the mutation on a champion. For example, I have Adrenaline modules on Kai'Sa here, which gives her 15% damage amp and 1% damage amp every 3 attacks she does during the fight. Or Iron Carapace on Rift Herald gives him 200 HP and armor and MR equal to 0.6% of maximum HP. And you get more of these mutations as you go up in the Void breakpoints. Now, the big thing to note about Void is that you really want to get to level 10 because at level 10, you can unlock Baron Nashor. And Baron Nashor is the absolute cap of this board, but getting to level 10 is very difficult. That's why for Void in particular, you cannot play towards this line unless you have a lot of econ. You can play towards it from gold econ augments, but generally speaking, you're going to want to have prismatic econ augments to play towards Void. With this Baron Nashor unit, he's quite unique. He actually takes up 2 team slots, not just 1, and he contributes 2 to the Void trait instead of just 1. So if you look at Void, there's only 8 champions, but because Baron Nashor contributes 2 Void, you can get 9 Void without any emblems at all. So this is your goal every single time that you play towards Void. And so you're going to be prioritizing those econ augments. Getting a prismatic econ augment into win out is the absolute best thing you can do with Void. Otherwise, you're going to be trying to stabilize on level 8. Let's talk about level 8 for a moment here, because there's 2 core 4 costs that you have to unlock. The first one is Rift Herald. So to unlock Rift Herald, you have to play 2 Void or more for at least 8 player combats. And I want to note here, this is player combat. So unlike most unlock conditions, this one will not work during PvE rounds. So if you field 2 Void or more from 2-1 and you never take it out, you will unlock Rift Herald on 3-5. It is extremely important that you at least unlock Rift Herald by stage 4 roll down so that you can actually see him in your shops. Likewise with Kai'Sa here, this is probably one of the most frustrating units in the game when it comes to how its unlock works. So you can only unlock Kai'Sa by putting 3 items on any long shot unit, and you have to be level 8. And the reason this is a little bit frustrating is you have to be mindful of the fact, let's say you level up on 4-2 and you're level 8 on 4-2, you have 3 items on Kog'Maw, and you roll, Kai'Sa's not going to be in your shop. You actually have to play the round at level 8 with the Kog'Maw with 3 items before you can start seeing Kai'Sa in your shops. I'm hoping they change this, to be honest with you. But the important thing to note is this really makes you want to level up on 4-1 so that you can play your units with 3 long shot in, or even on 3-7 if you have enough econ. And then that will allow you to unlock Kai'Sa before you do your big roll down on level 8. So it's really important that your level 8 roll down has both Rift Herald and Kai'Sa, because that's how you're going to end up being able to stabilize, is trying to stabilize around 6 Void and then eventually trying to get to Baron Nashor. All right, next up we have Aurelion Sol. So Aurelion Sol is unique in his unlock condition. In order to unlock him, you need to field every single Targon unit in the game. There are 5 total, aside from Aurelion himself. You have Aphelios, you have Leona, you have Zoe, Taric, and Diana. You have 2 4 costs, 2 3 cost, and 1 2 cost. But one of the 4 cost is unlocked by having a Leona 2 with 3 items equipped. So that's a 2-star 3 cost with 3 items equipped, and you're guaranteed to get Diana. So what's the catch here? Because there's no 5 cost involved, which means that you can get this really powerful 7 cost pretty early into the game. Well, it turns out that Aurelion Sol is balanced around the idea of being able to get him in stage 3 effectively. You should not be playing towards Aurelion Sol unless you can get him in stage 3 at some point with 3 mana items is also quite important. And the reason it works like this is because if you read Aurelion Sol's ability, which unfortunately my website is, I believe, a little bugged right now. It's repeating the different Stardust upgrades twice. That's why the tooltip looks ridiculously long. Maybe if I go over here, you can see more of it. But the basic idea is this. Every single time that Aurelion Sol casts his ability, he's going to collect some Stardust. And as he gets more Stardust, he will upgrade his ability and it will become more and more and more and more powerful. In fact, at the very last upgrade, he effectively becomes a 3-star 5 cost, even at 1 star. He is that powerful if you're able to get to the very final upgrade. Now, it is very difficult to get this unit all the way up to its second to last upgrade, which is actually realistic to get to, which is 700 Stardust. In order to get there, you need to have this triple mana build, and ideally, you also want to be able to have the Aurelion Sol again at some point in stage 3. Now, in order to get more Stardust, the way you're able to increase your Stardust rate is if you look at his Starforger ability, he will get more Stardust for every single other Targon unit fielded. So ideally, you keep every single Targon unit on your board, even though they don't provide any traits. If you look at this, they are a little bit stronger than the average champion. Basically, they are threats. They don't provide any other value other than the fact that they are powerful units. And they also, again, contribute to getting more Stardust from Aurelion Sol casting. So the main condition for this is you ideally want to have an early Taric, ideally before 3-5. And then you also want some sort of augment like Heroic Grab Bag that will guarantee you your Leona 2, which then you're going to put 3 items on, which guarantees you your Diana on level 6. And then you can unlock Aurelion Sol. So there is a multi-step unlock process here. And I want to note that you have to wait around after playing 3 units on Leona to get Diana. And then you have to play your 5 Targon units and wait around before you get Aurelion Sol. So if you have 3 items on a Leona 2 on 3-5, you'll get Diana on 3-6. And then you have to field your 5 Targon units, and then you'll get Aurelion Sol on 3-7. The last thing I want to mention here is there is a double Trouble comp that plays around double Leona and double Zoe. This was very strong on PBE during the first couple of days, and then Leona and Zoe both got nerfed, and it is no longer anywhere near as strong as it was before, but it is worth noting here as one of the double Trouble lines for this set. All right, next up we have Piltover, and this is a comp that has not really performed that well all of PBE. It doesn't look like it's performing that well on live at the moment, and I think there's a chance this is a knowledge gap, like we just may not know the best Piltover modules to select for 4 and 6 to get the best results. I have seen this win games at 6 Piltover before, but generally speaking, this is something that I think most people have kind of steered away from, and again, the stats have suggested it's not that good. Part of why it's not that strong is because of how much trash you kind of have to play on your board to make 6 Piltover work. You'll notice that in this case, we have no traits on Orianna, no traits on Caitlyn, no traits on Vi, which, you know, who cares about Longshot, but not being able to get Defender, for example, or Invoker, these are really valuable traits that you can get for team-wide buffs. So you really have to get a lot of value out of that 6 Piltover, and that means that I think you need to pick modules that work well together. I have seen a Mining Drill, for example, into Fast 10, which is a 6 Piltover module that will give you a bunch of gold. I have seen Echo Chamber pop off in some cases, especially if you're able to get to the 2-star T-Hex. As a reminder, the T-Hex is unlocked by getting 9 unique star levels of Piltover fielded on your board. There's only 5 Piltover units, so if you 2-starred all of them, that would be 10 unique star levels, so you can 1-star one of them, and all the rest of them have to be 4-star or 2-starred, which is kind of difficult to get to. So generally speaking, this is not something I would ever angle towards unless you have like a really good spot for it. I don't even know if it's correct to drop down the 4 Piltover, because I do think there's a chance that a lot of the strength of the line is from combining different Piltover modules together. And I think there is even a world where maybe you go for 6 Piltover, get that Mining Drill, farm as much gold as possible, and then drop down the 2 Piltover after you get the T-Hex and play around T-Hex plus Lucian Senna and maybe Loris with Ornn, or maybe even Nautilus plus Shyvana. There's a lot of different things you can do with this. I don't think it's been fully optimized yet, but for now I would probably stay away with it, or stay away from it, unless you have a really good spot for it. All right, next up we have Leap of Faith Illaoi, which is a hero augment that turns Illaoi into Darius from last set, where she'll do an airborne slam, and she'll recast if she kills the target. She can cast again and again and again. So you want to build damage on her, as well as Omnivamp, ideally like 2 damage items plus Omnivamp, or even 3 damage items you might be able to get away with on this like 6 bruiser board, for example. There are 2 main ways you can play her. You can play her in the Bard Sion reroll comp that we talked about before, or you can play around Bilgewater and try to cap really high with a bunch of different 5 costs. As a word of caution, obviously this is much harder to pilot, and there are way less games to use as reference. So if you want to play the safer option, definitely go for Bard Sion. If you want to challenge yourself and you have a better spot for this, then you can try out the Bilgewater version. Just try not to end on 7 Bilgewater, and remember that Lucky Doubloon is very broken for being able to farm even more Silver Serpents. And also remember that if you are close to 3-starring a unit, 3 Bilgewater is more likely to be able to allow you to hit units that are 3 cost or lower. So those are the main pieces of advice you need to keep in mind for the Bilgewater version. All right, next up we have Trials of Twilight, which is a hero augment for Xin Zhao. Important to note, this is a gold hero augment, not silver. I don't know why, unfortunately, the icon is silver on the website. That's just what it downloaded when I set it up. So I'll have to fix this at some point, but this is a gold hero augment. And basically what it does is it gives you a Xin Zhao that gets buffed. And then after you get 3-star Xin Zhao, you have to play him for 5 player combats, okay? It says right here, field a 3-star Xin Zhao for 5 player combats, and then Zaahen will come in and you could play him for the rest of the game. This hero augment, despite being really cool, lore accurate, and all this stuff, is generally not been performing that well for the entirety of PvE, and I suspect it's probably not that great on live right now either, even with the buffs that have been made to Ionia. But the good thing is you can play around this Yasuo reroll line, which has been a line for a while, and you're just gonna have an extra unit to reroll for with Xin Zhao. Again, I don't think it really is a line that you should be aiming for most of the time, but it is a cool comp to play. So if that's the reason you want to play it, then go for it. Otherwise, typically would avoid. I think I'll probably end up moving this down to C tier. And then lastly here, we have Artillery Barrage Rumble. Now, this is just not really that strong of a hero augment. They did buff Yordles before the set went live. I still don't think this is very good. I have it in D tier. Maybe that's disrespectful. Maybe it's a C tier line, but generally speaking, I do not think you should ever be clicking the Rumble hero augment unless, I don't know, you have some god tier spot for it and you really just want to see Rumble, because he does have some cool animations, but generally speaking, I do not think you should be clicking this augment at all. All right, that is it for the patch guide for the very first patch. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of changes. I mean, this is a day 1 patch guide, and it takes a while to record these. Even as I'm recording them, things are changing. We're getting more data. We're figuring out more boards. We're finding out what the best variations are and the best way to cap different boards are, what the best 5 cost are. So if you are interested in keeping up to date, TFT Flow, of course, will always be updated with the latest information about the meta, but there is a lot of little extra information that I provided in this video that I hope is helpful. And yeah, good luck on your climb in set 16. And thank you everybody for the support on TFT Flow. It's been amazing. Thank you, and I will see you next time.